everyone, it's Jack from Cultaholic.com, and it's time once again for another recap/review of this week's Monday Night Raw. But how good was Monday Night Raw? There's only one way to find out, and that is by assigning each individual segment a lovely individual grade. And the big question for me this week is, was this week's Raw better than last week's Raw reunion? Yeah, it was. Let's get on with the show. This is Monday Night Raw Graded. So we start off on a bit of a surprising track, I guess, because now it seems as though the 24/7 title is the most important title in WWE today. We all knew that already, of course, but now it seems like WWE know it as well. There was a voiceover and a big video package and dramatic music and a history recap of the title, and and we're opening the show with the 24/7 belt. The opening match is a mixed tag match between the current champion R-Truth, his partner Carmella, and the team of Drake Maverick and his wife Renee. Poor Renee, long-suffering Renee. It's also a new type of match, a mixed tag mosh pit match. It's basically, it's a mixed tag match crossed with a lumberjack match. All the typical sort of characters you see in the 24/7 title picture are surrounding the ring. I don't know why they needed the whole mosh pit name involved, but okay, I guess. They have a really brief mixed tag match. I was sad not to see Renee wrestle, actually. She was in full gear and she does have wrestling experience. She was even in one of the Mae Young Classics, which commentary neglected to mention, actually. But she didn't really hit any moves. She had a bit of a little brawl with Carmella at one point, but it didn't really go anywhere. R-Truth eventually pinned Drake Maverick to win and keep the title, but then all of the mosh pit, all of the lumberjacks around the ring stepped up and all got in there and dogpiled on R-Truth. The referee spotted a pinfall somewhere in there, counted the 3, and from the pile emerged Mike Kanellis with the championship. He ran backstage before anybody could catch him, got into, I think it was the referee's locker room by the looks of it, and locked himself in, and then Maria, his lovely wife, banged on the door and demanded to let him in. He said, "How do I know it's you?" She said, "You'll know it's me because I'm gonna say this line right now and it's mean and only I'm the mean person." Well, that's basically what was implied. She said, "I'm gonna kick down this door and kick you in the vagina because being a woman's worse than being a man and vaginas are stupid." I don't actually know what they were trying to say with that, but a bit uncomfortable. Okay, so I don't want to start this video off on the wrong track because I did actually enjoy a lot of Raw this week, but I do have to give this opening segment a D+, unfortunately. I just don't really know why this opened the show. I think this was more an issue of timing rather than anything that anyone did in this segment. The match wasn't very long or very good. It wasn't supposed to be very good. It was a comedy match. And the whole thing just felt a little bit strange. It felt a bit out of place. I wouldn't be surprised if it came out later on this week that this was originally meant to be later in the show and they had to act something at the start and then switch everything around. It seemed like one of those for me. But at the same time, if it gets eyes on the 24/7 title and then more views on WWE's YouTube channel, because those videos do huge numbers, the 24/7 ones, then I can kind of see why they did it. But it wasn't for me, and I do normally enjoy the 24/7 stuff too. So D+ is the grade. Don't worry, we'll check back with a roundup of the other 24/7 stuff that happened in this episode later on in the video. Now the first proper match, I guess, of the show, a gauntlet match to determine the #1 contender for the United States title at SummerSlam. And this was, I just bloody love a gauntlet match, so I immediately was biased in favor of this segment. I'm gonna have to use my notes because loads of stuff happened, but we started off with Rey Mysterio versus Cesaro. They had a really good 10-minute match because it's Rey Mysterio and Cesaro, but at the same time, I would have loved to have seen Cesaro win and be like the Iron Man of this. I understand why they didn't because he's a heel, but it would have been really nice to see, just on a personal note. I say just on a personal note as if I'm the only one who loves Cesaro. We all love Cesaro and we all wish that he was champion of not only WWE, but of our hearts as well. But Rey wins clean after about 10 minutes, very entertaining start of the match, and then Sami Zayn is the next man up. He tries to blindside Rey Mysterio in very Sami Zayn-ish fashion, but Rey avoids that, tries to do a schoolboy, they almost mess it up, but they improvise well and turn it into like a kind of more of a small package kind of thing, and Rey picks up the second victory in quick succession. Again, like Cesaro, I would have enjoyed to see more of Sami Zayn in this match, but it's hard to complain because, as you'll see, the rest of the action was really, really good. Next up, we get Rey versus Andrade, and of course this is a great part of the match because Andrade and Rey, as we've previously seen, have an incredible chemistry together. They are natural opponents and it works really, really well. Andrade looked great as ever, and Rey did a good job of, you know, powering on through the match despite his advanced age and despite having already wrestled for about 10-15 minutes. He was looking fresh. He was looking in way better condition than a man of his age should, and it makes me feel just like I'm wasting my youth. Andrade picks up the victory with the hammerlock DDT and then tries to rip off Rey Mysterio's mask. You do not disrespect a legend like Rey Mysterio in that fashion. And it turns out I'm not the only person who thinks that. Ricochet agrees. He's the final man in the match, runs out and saves the day. Well, sort of saves the day. I mean, Rey managed to hide his face, but his mask was already torn to shreds. And if you want to see what Rey looks like, just Google it or go and watch like an old Nitro or something. Ricochet and Andrade quite predictably wrestled really, really well together. They show, I sort of saw this little final portion of the gauntlet as a preview or a snippet of what they could do with a longer pay-per-view match laid out in front of them. I was really, really impressed. I would have liked to have seen Andrade win, but it was Ricochet who picked up the victory after another excellent part of this gauntlet match with the 630 senton. Is it a senton? 630 splat. 630 senton, because he lands on his back. And you know what? I don't have too many problems with that. I think Ricochet's a great wrestler. I'm not going to complain about seeing Ricochet versus AJ again for the United States title, but it would have been nice to see Andrade pick up the victory. I don't know. Ricochet gets on the mic in the ring and says he's going to beat AJ Styles at SummerSlam, and we cut backstage and Styles is watching the screen and just laughing to himself. Styles didn't have like a match or a big featured moment on this week's Raw, but everything he was in, all these little backstage segments, were just absolute gold. He was on top form. I'm going to give this an A-. It was really, really good action. My only gripe would be that we didn't get to see much of Cesaro or Sami Zayn, but in gauntlet matches, you know, some people are going to be featured more than others. I also can't understand why they give Ricochet the win instead of Andrade, because that would have set up a heel versus heel match, but I just really want to see AJ versus Andrade. But Ricochet is obviously going to put on a fantastic show as well. The only thing is, why did they scrap the rematch clause and then immediately, you know, we're given Rollins versus Lesnar again and AJ versus Ricochet again? But I don't want to be too negative. This was a really good match. I love a gauntlet match. A- is the grade. Strong second segment for this week's Raw. Next up, a moment of bliss with Alexa and Nikki, and there's no special guest this week. It seems like a moment of bliss is less a talk show now and more of like a gossip show. It's more like Keemstar. It's more like Keemstar mixed with wrestling. They just talk about things that have happened and try and stir up the drama a little bit. So they talk about various things that have happened already on the show and last week and stuff. So first of all, Alexa shouts out Maria Kanellis, because as we'll talk about later on when I do my 24/7 roundup, Maria actually ends up winning the title from Mike. That's not a huge spot. We all saw that coming. But then Alexa actually condemns Dolph Ziggler for attacking HBK and then condemns Becky Lynch for what happened earlier today, and then they show a video on the screen. This video was the highlight of this segment, and I actually really wish it had just been a little segment on its own rather than part of a wider moment of bliss segment, because it was really, really good stuff. It was almost like something from NXT. We see before the show, like the seats are all empty. Natalya's in the ring with Fit Finlay and a few trainees, and she's getting him to teach her how to reverse the disarmer. It's really, really interesting stuff. Then Becky comes along, sees what's going on, and beats up Natalya a bit, puts her in the disarmer, and then calls Finlay a traitor because they're both from Ireland. And then basically, yeah, I found it really intense, really good stuff, and it helped build the hype for the match at SummerSlam. My only complaint, as I say, is that it was part of this wider segment rather than a featured thing on its own. The segment's not over yet though, because Alexa hypes her match with Becky later on tonight, and then Becky appears on the Tron and talks down to physically talks down to them because she's up on the thing, but also, you know, verbally talks down to them as well and says, "Oh Alexa, I'm gonna batter you later on," basically, and also calls out Nikki and says, "Why are you letting Alexa lead you around like this? Where's your Celtic pride?" I've done the accent again I'm so sorry. Unfortunately, I didn't enjoy this. It gets a D+, it would have been a D, but that little Natalya and Becky bit was so good that I had to bump it up a little bit. But the rest of it, if Alexa's going to be playing sort of an informer role to let the audience know how we should feel, then why is she being so inconsistent? If she's going to do what the Street Profits kind of have been doing recently, then she needs to totally side with all the baby faces or all of the heels. And because Alexa's a heel, she needs to side with all of the heels. So yes, she sided with Maria. That makes a lot of sense. She sided with Natalya, which I guess makes sense because Becky's like sort of like a babyface, but a bit of a tweenerish one. And then also she sided with, well, HBK, who got attacked by Dolph Ziggler. Why would you have Alexa do that rather than side with Ziggler because he's a heel as well? I didn't understand that. Maybe it was to try and make Ziggler seem even worse than everyone else, because even Alexa says that's too much, but it didn't really set the tone strongly enough for me of what we were supposed to feel watching this segment. Next up, a match for the Raw Tag Team Championships, the Revival versus the Usos versus Gallows and Anderson, the OC. Na, 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 na. This was one of those segments that bleeds nicely out of the next one as the Usos cut off a moment of bliss and ran out and did their little promo as they're making their entrance. But just as they were about to say the Uso penitentiary line, Jimmy dropped his microphone and was like, oh God, and then like just that was it. And given his whole recent like arrest and everything, I could just hear the breaking of a million fingers as people try to tweet funny takes about it as quickly as they could. I don't know if he deliberately dropped the mic so he didn't have to say it, or if it was legitimately an accident, but either way, when it happened I was like, oh God, this is not a good thing. Fortunately, the match itself is really, really good. There seem to be like 3 distinct segments to this match. It starts off a bit strategic and a bit tactical, which the Revival obviously like. Then it devolves into a wild brawl with bodies flying all over the place and dives and topes, which obviously the Usos really like. And then it ends with an exchange of like double team moves and finishers and big slams and everything, which Anderson and Gallows like. I've shoehorned that in slightly there. I felt really clever when I wrote it, but now that it's coming out of my mouth, it does feel a little bit forced. No, you know what? Let's say that Gallows and Anderson do enjoy that sort of stuff because of their time in Japan, and it was a little bit Japan style towards the end of a match with everything escalating. Yes, let's keep that. Let's say that that's what I meant and that I'm really clever. Anyway, Gallows and Anderson pick up the win with the Magic Killer on one of the Usos. Wasn't sure which one it was, but they win the Raw Tag Team titles. They're the new champions. I really enjoyed this match as well, probably as much as the Gauntlet match, so it gets an A- as well. I was surprised by the title change. I thought maybe it was a way to shuffle the Usos out of the title picture. Not quite certain about that, because it does seem to set up the OC versus the Revival, which is a heel versus heel clash. So I'm not quite sure what the thinking is, but there's a little way to go until SummerSlam, so they could just take a totally different direction, I don't know. But the match was excellent, A-, and tag team bloody wrestling. Next up, the Viking Raiders versus Cole Carter and Johnny James, Enhancement Talent Boys. The Viking Raiders squashed them, and it gets a C. I don't have much more analysis. I guess they're building up the Viking Raiders for a title shot somewhere in the future. Keep doing what you're doing, boys. Next up, that match we talked about earlier, Becky Lynch versus Alexa Bliss. This is decent stuff. The action in the ring isn't as good as some of the other action we've seen earlier tonight, but the character work's really strong. Obviously, Becky and Alexa are 2 of the strongest characters in all of WWE right now, so they pack their match with a lot of trash talk, physical charisma, that sort of thing, and it makes for quite an interesting watch, even if the action isn't quite on the level that we've seen earlier on tonight. At least it is going well until Becky hits a Bexploder and Alexa seems to have legitimately injured her ankle. But it doesn't seem that legit because Alexa's really hamming it up, crying, getting officials to carry her out the ring. It seems like this could all be a ruse. Becky is declared the winner by referee stoppage, but she doesn't seem very happy. Neither does Nikki Cross, who gets on the apron, starts shoving Becky around, gets in the ring, and basically they have a match now. This match isn't as good, nor is it as long as the Becky versus Alexa one. And Becky picks up the win with the Manhandle Slam, a move that I'd just totally forgotten existed. It's okay for what it is. They kind of mess up the timing on the Manhandle Slam, but again, nothing majorly wrong with it at all. And it sets up a pretty good post-match segment. Alexa jumps Becky after the bell. It was all a ruse, she's fine, but Corey Graves is absolutely fantastic on commentary, going like, oh, she's fine all along, it's a miracle, kind of channeling Bobby Heenan a little bit. I really enjoyed that. Then Natalya comes out, clamps the sharpshooter on for a little bit, and heads to the back. Once she's backstage, Natalya then cuts a little bit of a promo on Becky, saying she's not interested in being her friend, and she wants to issue a challenge for SummerSlam. She wants a submission stipulation in their match. But then she says, I don't think Becky's got the guts to accept that, so I'm not going to issue that challenge. And I was like, what? On the whole, this gets a B-. I thought the Becky versus Alexa match was pretty good. The Nikki versus Becky match was a little bit short and the finish was a little bit like messed up, but it was still okay, it still did the job. And the post-match stuff was excellent, but then the interview after it was a little bit strange. I don't know where they're quite going with this. So on the whole, I think that all evens out into a B-. It wasn't the strongest thing on the show, but it certainly wasn't the worst thing either. Next up, Seth Rollins versus Dolph Ziggler. Moving fast, muscle mass, ready to fight. But he doesn't come out to his usual music. He actually comes out to HBK's theme tune, which I think is probably wish fulfillment for Dolph Ziggler. The crowd are obviously annoyed because they thought they were getting Shawn Michaels, but it's Dolph Ziggler instead, so good heel work there. He gets on the mic and cuts a promo asking Seth if he's lost his smile. I wondered if Dolph was just going to start whipping out loads of 90s Michaels references like, oh, you're looking a little rough, Seth. Did you get beaten up by a Marine in a parking lot? No, never mind, not that. They have a good 10-minute match together as well. They're obviously both workhorses in the ring, so it makes sense. But there's no finish. Just as Seth looks like he's about to win, he's jumped by the beast incarnate Brock Lesnar. And this beatdown, well, it started off with me just thinking, oh, here we go, another Brock Lesnar beatdown. No, this was even more vicious than usual. So we start off with, like, you know, German. Then they head out the ring. Brock hits an F5 into the ring post, injuring Seth's ribs. Then they get back in the ring. He sets up a chair upright, an F5 Seth onto the upright bit of the chair, ribs first. Seth starts coughing up blood, which is a really nice touch. Then another F5 onto the upright chair. And by this point, even Paul Heyman's like, Brock, stop. You've gone too far. At this point, I think the segment's over, but it's really not. Suddenly, just chaos starts breaking out absolutely everywhere backstage. So Rollins is getting stretchered out to an ambulance. Becky Lynch is there, seeing if he's all right, but not getting too intrusive. You know, it's not like they're ramming their relationship down our throats, as they have been guilty of doing so the past few weeks. Roman and the Usos also want to check on him, but he's just being rushed to the ambulance. Then suddenly, they're jumped by heels. Becky's not, but Roman and the Usos are jumped by Samoa Joe and the Club, or Gallows and Anderson, or the OC, or whatever. I get why Samoa Joe's jumping Roman. Don't quite get why the OC are jumping the Usos, considering they've won the tag titles now and they've already pinned the Usos earlier in the show. But it doesn't matter too much because it's all just chaos and it's really quite exciting. Rollins gets loaded into the ambulance. It's about to drive off, but it's stopped by Brock Lesnar, who drags him out the back of the ambulance and hits an F5 onto the side of the stretcher, man. It's such a good beatdown. I hope Seth's okay. On the whole, I'm going to give this an A-. I'm not sure quite what I think yet about Dolph's HBK stuff, whether this is going to continue and whether that's a good thing or not, if it does. But the match was decent and the beatdown stuff was absolutely excellent. So I'm going to have to give this an A-. If it had just been the beatdown on its own, I guess this would have been an A or maybe even an A+. It was that good. But the fact that we had a match with a non-finish before it does dilute the excitement very slightly. But that's not the point. The main point is that from this point on, Raw just totally kicked off. It wasn't even just this segment. The main event segment was also a crazy brawl. Before we get to that, let's do a 24/7 roundup. Not actually that much to report on this week, to be honest. So we know already that Mike Kanellis emerged from the opening segment as the champion, and then Maria threatened to break down the door that he was hiding behind and kick him in the vagina. Mike eventually lets Maria in, and he's so proud of himself. He's like, look, baby, I'm the 24/7 champion. You can finally look upon me with respect and dignity. And of course, she makes him lay down for her and you know, pins him with a boot on the chest. She's now the 24/7 champion and emerges from that room into the general backstage area, starts taunting people like Titus O'Neil, other people in the 24/7 division, saying, how are you gonna, you know, you don't want to attack a pregnant woman, what are you gonna do? Which is an interesting way, an interesting angle, I guess, I suppose. Well, how is anyone going to get this title off her? A little bit later on, she's bragging backstage, cutting a promo, and then Braun Strowman comes along and just glares, and she has to, like, eventually run away. And I think if they can somehow, obviously without harming a pregnant woman in storyline, because that's, you know, it's a bit too much, whoa. If they can somehow get, I've just forgotten the whole Lita and Snitsky, they've done it already, they've got previous. But anyway, if they can somehow get the title onto Braun and everyone else has to band together and really work as a team to try and get the title off this monster, that's what I want to see from the future of the 24/7 division. Because as much as I love Drake Maverick and our Truth Told thing, I would love if they and others were forced to team together to try and take down this giant. And I know we all complain about Braun often being misused, but I just really want to see it, and I think it would be excellent. Because of that potential, and because that's really where I hope it goes, and just because I enjoy the little wrinkle, I guess, of not being able to actually harm Maria because she's pregnant, how do we get the belt off her? I'm going to give this 24/7 roundup a C+. Not that much actually happened after the opening segment, but I think it's got a bit of potential, and that's despite me really not enjoying this Mike and Maria Kanellis stuff. I don't find it good heel heat, I just find it a bit uncomfortable and a bit annoying to watch because she's just constantly horrible to him, and it doesn't seem to be helping him in any way. Like, I can't see him breaking free and, you know, getting one over on her somehow because she's carrying his child. I just don't understand how this is meant to get anyone over. But with that being said, this does get a C+, with just the hope that somehow Strowman gets that title and then everything just goes even more crazy. Speaking of crazy, now it's time for not the main event, but the final segment of the show, the Samoan Summit. The reason I say this is crazy is because it's just a bit of a wild brawl, really, but it's a really entertaining one. I'll have to recap it with my notes because there was a lot. So Joe came out without Roman, of course, at first because he's just beating him up backstage and says, sorry, but the Samoan Summit is cancelled because peace talks fell apart. Great line from Samoa Joe. Give him the mic all the time. Roman comes out and they brawl for a bit until Roman launches the ring steps into Samoa Joe's face. Great little spot. But then Roman is jumped by Drew McIntyre and they brawl through the crowd. They brawl all the way around the crowd and then head back to the ring where Joe joins in again. So it's now a 2-on-1 beatdown against Roman Reigns. Then, that all makes sense, by the way, because Drew has got ongoing issues with Roman, so it's not like a random thing. That's totally fine. Then Cedric Alexander runs out to help even the odds, which again makes sense because he's currently feuding with Drew. It's all linked. I'm enjoying it so far. They brawl up the ramp. It's getting wilder and wilder by the spot. Drew takes control as he suplexes Cedric into the LED boards on the entranceway. Then it looks like the heels are about to put Roman through the announce table, but he's saved by the Usos who come out. Then they're attacked by the Club who come out because they were brawling earlier as well. That one's not as strong a feud, I don't think, but at the same time, it all makes sense in the context of this episode, I suppose. Then they save Roman from being put through the table, and then Cedric has managed to climb himself up on top of the entranceway and jumps off with I'm talking a mile a minute here because it was just so exciting. Cedric climbs up on top of the entranceway and dives onto everybody, and it's really nice to see Cedric Alexander, a man so neglected since he moved up from 205 Live, be really featured towards the end of a Monday Night Raw and not as a bloody janitor in a luchador mask. It all spills back to the ring, the babyfaces get the upper hand and Roman Reigns finishes Joe off with a big spear, and then the Usos, Roman and Cedric have the most hyped celebration you've ever seen in the ring. Just like hugging each other, shaking the ropes like the Ultimate Warrior. It was really funny, but not in a bad way. It was actually found it quite funny, but it was really entertaining as well. This gets a B+. Yes, there was one tiny negative, which was the fact that I don't understand why the OC are still getting so involved with the Usos despite they've already won the tag titles. They're top of the division. They don't want to be concerning themselves with other teams. But that's not the point really. This was a really fun brawl at the end of the show. Not quite as good as the Lesnar beatdown on Rollins, which got an A-, but this one gets a B+. I found it kind of wild and unhinged, and it felt almost as if actually aggression was just taking over the show and it just spilled over from that Lesnar beatdown and kind of infected everyone else. It was really cool and not the sort of segment you often see to end Raw. And usually if you do, it's more of like a pull-apart brawl with two big heavyweight contenders being kept apart. But in this one, everyone just hitting moves on each other left, right and centre. In fact, overall as well, I'm going to give this week's Raw a B+. It wasn't a consistent show throughout, but the good stuff, the peaks of the show were really, really good and really entertaining. From the Gauntlet match to the whole Seth Rollins and Brock Lesnar beatdown to that closing segment to the tag title switch as well. That match was really good too. So yeah, the show was built around 4 really good moments, and then everything else was either decent or a little bit weak. But on the whole, I was quite impressed with this week's Raw. A good show, B+ is the grade, and I really hope they can continue this momentum heading into SummerSlam. Thanks very much for watching, and let us know what you think in the comments section down below. You can follow Cultaholic on Twitter @Cultaholic and on Facebook at facebook.com/Cultaholic. If you enjoy what we do, then please do check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Cultaholic, where you can pledge. And don't forget, of course, most importantly of all, to hit subscribe and to join us.